Well, hello everyone, and welcome, and thank you for being here today. My name is Jeannie Shop, and I represent the Pathways of Toward Literacy, and I'm really here to uplift this amazing book that will be coming out in April. Reading is an optional, fulfilling the promise of literacy for secondary students. So this book exists because of leaders and educators like Mitchell Brookins that are deeply committed to improving literacy outcomes for adolescents. So, to begin our conversation today, Mitchell, could you just introduce yourself and tell you why this topic, because you wrote about comprehension, is so critical in improving secondary literacy outcomes?
So I got my start as a third grade teacher, south side of Chicago. And I'll always remember after 2 years of teaching third grade, my principal said, Mitchell, you belong in middle school. The types of text and writing that you were doing with third graders, I was very intense as a third grade teacher. Although all the fourth grade teachers after this always said like, yeah, they were pretty much prepared for fourth grade. But I moved to sixth grade my first year. I think it was in 2008. I started as a sixth grade teacher there, and I'll never forget that first year, 98% of my children passed the state test in reading and in writing. And so I said, you know what? I guess my principal was right. I belong in middle school. And so that teaching career moved into being a district leader of RTI, a literacy coach, then moving it into school administration around 2012. And then around 2014, I moved to New Orleans and I was a school administrator with three different schools here, school districts here in New Orleans. And a lot of my work really focused in on turnaround. I am someone who, interested enough, I want to go where the challenge resides. So that whole thing of you've got a year or two to turn around a school, although that is very tough work, I always believe that someone has to do it and why not me? And so I was a school administrator, and then 2020 happened, pandemic, and I decided at that moment, I want to help everyone else. I want to scale the work that I was doing as a teacher, the work that I was doing as a school administrator, as a coach, and become a consultant. And so for the past 5 years, I've been a consultant with leading educators and also Brookins Consulting, my own LLC, where I do all things literacy. I'm a literacy nerd.
You are, and such a brilliant literacy nerd, bringing great value to whatever space you're in. So, this chapter on comprehension, right, is critical for our secondary educators and leaders to truly understand. So, you tell me why you believe it is so critical.
Comprehension. I mean, in layman's terms, what's the point of reading a book if you don't get it? Right? If you don't access meaning from it, if you don't take something from it, to me, there is no absolute point in even reading text. So I've always been of the mindset of I wanted students not just to comprehend, but I want them to have insight.
Yeah.
So if you've ever followed me and you see the presentations, it's not just about what is the main idea. It's all about what is the human experience.
Hmm.
I'm really big into literature, so when you talk about disciplinary literacy, that's why a lot of the texts that I choose are within that genre,
Hmm.
because that's one of my favorite.
Well, and as I was writing a little author spotlight on this book coming up through Solution Tree, they asked me about my experience, and I'm like, so you mean just because I give the kids a novel and give them a study guide doesn't mean they're gonna actually, and I teach the standards, they're gonna actually take something from this book. So I 100% agree with
Yep.
you, right? It's all about the human condition. That's why we're even here on this planet, right? Is to just understand people and understand
Yes.
ourselves at a deeper level. And we can do that through literature, right? So, what would you say in this chapter? Because there's going to be, we don't want to give it away because it is going to be a game changer for so many people. But if you want to give a little hint, what would you say would be some of the some of the takeaways that you hope leaders and teachers learn that they can instantly understand this complex concept of comprehension.
How do you say I would love for them to take a second look at comprehension again? I think before I came into really what I think we now consider the science of reading movement, I think we all had heard about comprehension. You've heard about Bloom's taxonomy, critical thinking, and all of those things. When I came across the term mental model,
Mhm.
something about that term just resonated with me. And I found myself really aligned with understanding that when you pick up a text, it is a transactional experience. And you move from lifting words off the page to going in your background knowledge and integrating with what the author is saying. And then you walk away with a lasting memory. I never forget reading Nancy Tennessee's book, Comprehension Blueprint, right?
Right.
And when you had the chapter on mental model, that section, it took me back to a time where my teachers used to say, well, draw a cover for the book, right? Or write a book report. What do you want people to remember? And so for me, I want people to read this chapter about mental model and comprehension and understand that before you teach a text, you need to decide what is it that you want your children to remember. What is that? It cannot be text structure. It cannot
Can't
be
be text
information evidence.
evidence, citing text evidence,
It can't be that.
compare and contrast.
It has to be like in third grade reading Charlotte's Web, and that was the first book I learned about friendship, right? Or reading Roll Up Thunder, Hear My Cry and learning about Jim Crow. It was the knowledge gained. And so I hope that when people leave this chapter, they will walk away saying, enough of comprehension instruction looking like CFUs, check for understandings, and comprehension instruction that looks like constructing meaning from print.
Well, because you bring up a few things is running through my mind, right? And one of them was that we have Nancy Hennessy in this book as well. She co-wrote the chapter of her section with Julie Salamone, and their focus was on disciplinary and content literacy, which I think are critical pieces in secondary space. But I always said to the editor, like, we need this chapter, right? Even if we have content and disciplinary literacy, we need our educators to really understand, like, really what is comprehension and how do we ensure that our students learn what they're supposed to learn from reading this book without just hyper focused on these strategies, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about your chapter, how does your unique lens and your professional experience shape your insights in this chapter of this book?
Hmm. I think one, what I bring to secondary literacy, if y'all allow me to share this, is I know what that I call it the text-based stall means. When you get to secondary literacy and we see all of the students who are struggling with reading, we find them in this grades 3 through 5,
Mhm.
right? I spent a lot of time in grades 3 through 5 and 3 through 6 and understanding what does that transition looks like. And so I do take an approach of like, these are the scaffolds that you have to put in place to lift the content off the page, not just the words. I also will share too, again, like I said earlier, a lot of my experience, even as a school leader and turnaround schools have been K-8, where I've had to put a heavy focus on middle school as well, and understanding that there are unique challenges that it's not just text. It's you're dealing with middle school students, you're dealing with adolescents and who they are as human beings, and that has to come through. But finally, the one that I don't share too often that people pick up a little bit. Um, People always say I'm very like I'm inspirational. I give the church vibe, I guess. That's what they say. Um, and I don't share with people that in actuality, I've spent 7 years being trained in textual criticism. I have a degree in religious studies. I've gone to seminary, and people think about it more on the pastor side. But they don't get that. No, I've been actually trained by experts of early Christian texts and how to deconstruct them and close read them and all of that. And so
Right.
I bring a very highly trained skill of disciplinary literacy that goes beyond content area literacy. And so that's why my principal said, Hub, the way you're teaching text belongs in secondary literacy because I was very much into historical criticism, biographical criticism, philosophical
Yes.
criticism, and using those lenses. And so that's a part of that's what I bring to the table. So that's why I love close reading. That's why I love text analysis. That's why I live and breathe this thing. And understanding that even in my training of textual criticism, I learned that your understanding evolves. As you understand more about history, understand more about people, those lens deepen and you go back to text differently. And so
Mhm.
that's why the mental model chapter really fits me because your mental model is not the same today and yesterday.
Well, not only that is, you and I could be reading the same text, and
Yep.
well, my mental model is going to depend upon my own funds of knowledge and how
Yep.
I'm integrating that text. It might be completely different than what you are. And I think for me, as a seventh grade English language arts teacher, that was almost like, at the beginning, right, we're a little dialed into the standards because that kind of grounds us because sometimes we're
Yep.
unsure. But in all reality, like having that evolution that everybody is going to have their own enduring understanding, and that's okay, right? It depends on what your level of coherence is and what you're
Yep.
connecting to at that space and time. And I find it fascinating that your principal said that you were beyond third grade as far as what you were trying to do with your students. And I was, as a seventh grade English language arts teacher, I had this one guy in my classroom, and he was associate at that time, and he had his own child in my room, but he was serving as a paraprofessional. And after class, he's like, Jeannie, you belong at the college level. What you're asking these seventh graders to do. I'm like, really? Just actually kind of teaching what I'm supposed to be teaching, but I'm teaching it at a high level, right?
But
But I also think
but that's
that
powerful.
that's powerful, right? Because I get that. Like I wanted my kids to have this rich experience. And to your point about having, being a really strong teacher in secondary space, we have to be one part preacher and one part teacher, right?
Yes. Yep.
Because we have middle schoolers that, I always say I taught seventh grade ELA, and how many of you look back and think that was the best year of your life? Said no one.
That was the most that
And
whole
so that's
time
why I had to be a
period.
preacher
Yes.
and a teacher because I had to get them excited about stuff that they were not really interested in.
Right. No, I hear all of that, and I think that is honestly what, again, I'm hoping that we get back to loving teaching reading again in secondary spaces. And I know we don't like to use the word love in all different places, but I only use that because I think we're missing that. I think we are missing. I remember when I was a new teacher. I would call my other friends who are teachers and we would talk about the books that we were going to teach. And you realize what Toni Morrison did right there and what Langston Hughes is doing over there. Well, I'm going to teach that tomorrow. And we brought that into the space so that our
Right,
kids would get excited about language, right?
right,
And I think I want people to go back to that it's okay to building a mental model is helping children navigate complexities. And it's not linear, right? It can be recursive. It goes back and forwards. And that's what we need to see in instruction.
right. It's not a particular endpoint, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. So, as our readers and our audience, is learning about this project, right? It's a collection of people that are coming together to lift adolescent literacy because we're at a crisis point, right? Our NAEP scores that came out in the spring, I mean, we're graduating almost 70% of our children that cannot read at grade level. So, how do you see your contribution in this book and for literacy outcomes for adolescents? And what do you hope readers really understand about the collective purpose of this book?
Hmm. That is possible. I think that we've lost some of the joy in secondary because it feels so hard, it feels so heavy. And so it inspires me that when I looked at the list of the authors of this book, everybody's laying aside everything else and saying, let me put my voice here. Let me give you my perspective. And I think that is what we need. We need to go back to understanding that many hands make light the work. And if all of us come together and raise similar messages in our unique ways, I think people will read this book and see themselves in different chapters,
Mhm.
and see their work. And so I think that's what this is about. It's now saying we can do this. We know a lot. We know how to do this. We can move this needle, and I think the voices in this book are going to elevate that quite well.
Well, I am so incredibly honored that you said yes to this project to add your voice um, and on the
She
pages of
made
this
me, you
text.
all. She made me. But no, and I want to thank you for that. I do want to thank you for that because the other piece that I cannot, I will not allow this moment to pass to give you your flowers because you have been someone who you stepped out. You said, when I said no, you came back, nagged me about it again. And I knew by that time it's something I had to do. And I listened, and I'm grateful for that because
Mhm.
even writing the chapter was a transactional experience for me as well. It allowed me to get deeper, allowed me to get clearer. And so you all get to see, where I am, where I was, where I am today with that topic. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And just to end note, because this is how your chapter is going to up-level this work, is for all of us to understand, as Hugh Katz has taught us, right? We forget 90% of what we've learned. And when I speak to adults and say, hey, do you remember reading The Outsiders? And they're like, yeah. So what do you remember? And each person remembered something different about that same text,
Yep.
right? And it's like we in this space, we have to always remember, right? We are building, not we're building the mind, right? And the human condition
Yeah.
and how it all connects together. And it starts with understanding what comprehension is and what it isn't. So thank you, Mitchell, for
And I
saying
love
yes.
that. I love that because anyone who also knows me that probably one of the most prolific writers and speakers is really the vision of what I see comprehension is. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King once said the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Many people hang on that first clause, that first sentence while out, but they don't really read a little bit further when he talks about what a complete education is. It's not the power of concentration, but it's the worthy objectives in which you concentrate. So when I think about a mental model, you cannot build a mental model if you're not thinking intensely about the text, if you're not thinking critically about the text, and if your teacher is not focusing you in on the most worthy ideas in that text. And so I pay homage to him because I truly understand that that is how I learned to build a mental model. It's with staying with the text and intensely thinking and reflecting on that.
Well, that's a great way to end. And it's recording on MLK Day. So thank you for also bringing him into this space on this day. So, readers, it's coming out in April. Get ready to grab your copy and start lifting up adolescent literacy and changing kids' lives. Thank you.